Welcome, everyone. We're happy to get started here. I'm just going to share my slides. This is the REACH Alliance application workshop. Today is Thursday, March 24th, 2022, and we're happy that you could join us and that you're interested in learning more about how you can be part of our REACH cohort next year. So today, just a few, before we get started on the agenda, there is actually, let me turn on live captioning. It is enabled so that you could, there we go, we just turned that on. If you need live captioning, you can turn it on in your own personal settings. And we will be taking Q&A questions throughout and then have a time dedicated at the end to answer. So please send your questions as you're going through the presentation if it's not covered. So today on the agenda, we're going to get started with what is the REACH Alliance and what is our holistic researcher experience, and who better to share that but our executive director and alum herself, Marion McLeod. And then we will have two of our researchers. One is a recent grad, literally just published their case study. And then we'll have a current researcher as well, Saida Hassan, Jonathan Blumenthal will both join us and share their individual experiences following that. And then we'll get to the technical parts and the important but not so interesting parts, which is the application process. And I will review that as I am very well acquainted with the process. And then we'll have a time dedicated at the end for Q&A. And if you have questions, as I said, please share those along. So we will get started here, and I'll toss the baton to Marion.
Thank you so much, Moni, and thanks for everyone that's joining us online and that will be watching this recording after the fact. And special thanks to Jonathan and Saida for being here with us today. As Moni alluded, I think they'll probably offer some of the most interesting and useful information for all of you. So let me just start by explaining the origin of REACH, our origin story, really. So we are inspired by the Sustainable Development Goals. That's really the impetus for this whole initiative that we're going to be speaking to you about today. We see this quote here from Anthony Lake. Disaggregate the data and we find that our statistical national successes are masking moral and practical failures. People are left behind simply because they live in rural communities, urban slums, conflict zones, or are part of Indigenous groups, people with disabilities, or because they are girls. So this is really what we are most interested in. This is the population and group of people that we care very deeply about here at the REACH Alliance, and really understanding how it is that essential goods and services are reaching those that are left behind for a variety of reasons. So the REACH Alliance was founded here at the University of Toronto in 2015. This is just an important point to note because we now are a global alliance, as you may have seen from our website. So in 2020, we launched an expansion to scale to 6 top universities around the world by 2022. So last year, we partnered with University College London, Oxford, and Tec de Monterrey in Mexico. And we're in the process now of bringing on 3 more global university partners. So if you're a member of this year's cohort, you would have an opportunity to engage with those students at the other universities as well as faculty. And the network is just really continuing to grow and expand over the next 12 to 18 months. We are a partnership with the MasterCard Center for Inclusive Growth. So we are a public-private partnership in a sense. They provide financial support as well as obviously technical, administrative, and network support to the REACH Alliance. As I mentioned, we are inspired by the UN SDGs. So if you're not familiar with those, please do take some time to review that material. There's a hyperlink here in the slides before you submit your application. It'll be really important to be at least familiar with the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals to be successful as a researcher with the Alliance. At the core, what we are is a student-driven, faculty-mentored research and leadership initiative. And as I've already alluded to, we're really focused on examining how critical interventions reach those that are hardest to reach. So we're less interested in standard development programs, but really focused on those initiatives that are getting to that last mile, that last 10% or 2% of people with an essential good and service. Our research has been featured in many leading outlets. You can see our publications and other knowledge products on our website, as well as our case studies are also available on the website. Our vision and mission. So our vision is to investigate how to get important stuff to everyone everywhere. Now, important stuff is very intentional words there, if it doesn't appear to be. But the reason we say important stuff is because it's not just one thing that we're interested in. We're interested in all types of goods and services. So from birth registration to cash transfers to energy, vaccines, and everything in between. Anything that is deemed as an essential good or service for alleviating poverty would be within scope for the REACH Alliance. Our mission is to pursue the full achievement of the SDGs by equipping and empowering the next generation, all of you, to be global leaders and to create knowledge that inspires action on reaching those that are hardest to reach. And you can see some stats here about the scope and scale of our network. This is a very high level summary, and I know that the text is too small for you to see now, but I do encourage you to take a closer look once you have the slides in hand. This represents about half of the research that we have done to date. It is all of our published research. We have about 20 or so case studies currently in production or that have just been published in advance of our REACH Symposium happening at the end of April. As you can see from this slide, our research focuses on all corners of the world. So we are interested in all country contexts. And once you have a chance to look into the detail of the case studies, you can also see that our research covers all of the Sustainable Development Goals. So we really are interested in a wide range of issues. Again, the common denominator being that these programs are effectively reaching, in most cases, those that are hardest to reach. There's 3 institutional icons here. Those represent our current institutional partnerships at, as I mentioned, UCL Oxford and Tech de Monterrey. And as I do mention, there will be 3 more universities joining the network by the end of this year. This is just a quick summary so you can get a sense for the faculty mentors that are involved in our program. I won't spend much time because you can look into their biographies and have more detail available on the leadership page at our website. But we do want to really highlight the breadth of expertise that the faculty bring. So we have a number of different faculties represented here from, the Faculty of Social Work all the way through to medicine, engineering, and many others. Of course, underpinning all of the work that we do is equity, diversity, and inclusion. So we have an equity, diversity, and inclusion charter that we created with the REACH Alliance community. So including our students, alumni, faculty, mentors, staff, and other key stakeholders in our group. We underwent a very consultative process that was facilitated by the Anti-Racism and Cultural Diversity Office here at the University of Toronto. I encourage you to take a look. The charter is only 2 pages and it highlights the commitments that we've made and the principles that guide our work. We've pulled these principles here to the side. You can see there's 6 listed. I think excellence is really the cornerstone here because we really do believe that equity, diversity, and inclusion does facilitate excellence in the work that we do. And this really is important not only from a recruitment, a student and faculty recruitment perspective, but also very much plays out in the research that we conduct and of course conforming to research ethics protocols, as well as in the way that we tell the stories and sort of measure the impact of the work that we do here at the REACH Alliance. So please do check that out when you have a chance. Very quickly, because I know Jonathan and Saida will get into more detail, and it's going to be much more interesting for you to hear from researchers on this than me. But I do just want to provide a very high-level overview of the program, and then we'll kind of get into more detail throughout the presentation. The research cycle is 12 to 16 months. The reason for the range here is because some teams decide to, in addition to producing a case study report, go on to also produce other knowledge translation deliverables, such as op-eds, policy briefs, videos. Really, we have communication support to kind of support whatever the team wants to do. But if the team is focused exclusively on that case study and that's all that they do produce at the end, it is about a 12-month process, but there is some leeway and flexibility there. The process is, as I mentioned, really student-led, but the faculty mentors do support students to select case study topics that are relevant and interesting. So our case studies come to us from partner organizations, they come to us from faculty mentors, and then of course from the students themselves. So the pitching process, which we'll speak to a little bit more briefly here, is very much driven by students. And so if it's a project, we get a lot of questions about how our case studies are selected, and it's really driven by the students. So if there's a topic of interest for you, you would have an opportunity to pitch that to the group. It would undergo sort of rigorous assessment by your peer researchers as well as the faculty. But that is how ultimately the case studies are selected, is really by the students with support and input from faculty. Research is first conducted in a secondary fashion. So this is, of course, the literature review and preparing for the research ethics application. Many folks have not done a research ethics application when they join the Reach Alliance. That's okay. We've got a number of workshops set up to facilitate and support you in that process. And that usually happens sort of midway through the experience. So you'll have a sense for your case study topic before you do need to submit that application. And then once your application has been approved, you are in the primary research phase. So Seda will be very soon entering, if she has not already entered into that process, and she can tell you a little bit more about that. The case study report is the final deliverable that the teams produce. This case study is written in collaboration with the researchers and then the faculty mentor on the project. All members of the team contribute to that one case study report. As I say, other knowledge translation products are certainly within scope, and we have the support on staff with regard to communications to make that happen for teams. But in terms of the only required deliverable, that is really the case study report. The other deliverables are if you're interested and feel so inspired, but really it's the case study report that we look to as the final deliverable. Underpinning this research process are sort of three other components of the program that I do want to very briefly speak to. One is team performance coaching. So all of the research teams are paired at the beginning of the year with an individual performance coach. That person meets with them one-on-one as well as in a team environment and really drives performance. So the aim here is to ensure that each of you is equipped with professional skills around meeting organization, leadership, public speaking, etc. When you come out of this program, but then also that you are able to leverage the assets and strengths of your team members in order to sort of perform at your best, and also that your team is performing at an optimal level. The skills development series also happens alongside the research process. So we offer roughly monthly skills development workshops that are delivered mainly by our faculty, but also sometimes by other consultants or key professionals that we invite into the Reach Alliance. These skills development workshops won't go into much detail because I know it comes up later in the presentation, but they cover a range of topics that really are meant to help underpin your understanding and support you in the research process. So they'll get into qualitative and quantitative data analysis approaches, interviews, how to conduct interviews, how to communicate your findings, etc. And then finally, the Global Alumni Network. So what I always say to researchers is that alumni are our greatest asset. So when I know that we are having success, it's when I see our alumni out there in the world having leadership positions in various sectors and actually having an impact and working to advance the Sustainable Development Goals. So at the end of the program, you'll be granted access to an exclusive alumni portal where jobs and events are posted, as well as lots of opportunities to network through an exclusive networking platform that we are just now launching. So by the time you go through the program, we should have all the kinks worked out, but something to look forward to for sure. And this slide, I'm not gonna speak to it because it's essentially just a timeline representation of the information that I just shared, but it does give you a very high level overview of the different steps and when they would occur throughout the year. So obviously we start with recruitment now. Your case study pitching goes on over the summer. From September to January, you're doing your secondary research, preparing your research ethics application. Then once that's approved, you begin your interviews, you begin report writing, which happens throughout the spring and early summer. Your final case study reports are due on June 30th, and that's when we begin the editing and layout design process so that we can then publish the report. These are just a couple of examples of knowledge translation outputs that we have. So There's a case study report on this slide. So it's Women's Economic Empowerment in Jalisco, Mexico. That is an example of one of our case study reports. To the left of that, you can see an article that was published in the BMJ Global Health. So many of our teams do go on to produce outputs and articles for peer-reviewed publications. On the right of that, you see an article that's in the Globe and Mail and then also the Hill Times. So again, these are deliverables that are being authored by our researchers. We also produce case study videos for all of our case studies. So that's another way that we help kind of communicate and disseminate the information that you all gather throughout the course of the year. Finally, everything really culminates with the REACH Symposium. So we do have our symposium coming up on April 21st and 22nd. The link to register is available on our website. So I encourage you to take a look at that and register. This is the very first year that we've actually made it available to the public, which is quite exciting for us. On this slide, you can see our speakers from last year, as well as some of the outputs that were associated with the symposium. But I think what's most important and most interesting here is that we do bring in leaders from across sectors, and we do really challenge them to engage with the research and to kind of engage with these questions about how to reach the hardest to reach from their vantage point in the public or the private sector, civil society, and then of course in the academy as well. So all of the recordings from last year are available on the website as well. Again, I would encourage you to take a look at those in advance of submitting your application. There's a lot of great insight there that you can glean not only from the external speakers, but also from the alumni, such as Addie and Sydney that spoke at last year's REACH Symposium, for example. Wonderful. So with that, it is now my great honor and pleasure to introduce Jonathan, who's here with us today. So Jonathan was a researcher in the 2020-2021 cohort, and his case study, as Moni mentioned, has just been published, but I won't steal the thunder, Jonathan. I will let you tell them about that. So thanks so much for being here, Jonathan, and over to you.
Thanks, Maren. Yeah, thanks. And as the picture says, hi, everyone. It's really nice to talk to you. So this picture is actually something I drew as part of one of the career exploration workshops that we did in REACH last January. So essentially the prompt was to draw what you enjoy doing. And for me, that was meeting people in REACH. One of the really great things is you get to meet so many really cool, talented people. So there's, of course, your team. We get to work quite closely with, but there are also the other teams at U of T. And then as we were going through our cohort, the other teams from Oxford and Monterey got brought on, and that was really cool getting to meet them and interacting with them. And then in the back now you can see what I didn't like as much, and that was being on Zoom all day long, because this was during kind of last year when everything was online. But despite that, I'll have to say REACH didn't really feel like one of those online classes. It's very interactive and involved, and I still had a very positive experience. And so I think, you know, this year going forward, where things are kind of going back more into in-person stuff, and there's maybe the opportunity to do more in-person stuff, I'm confident, or at least hopeful, that you'll get to have an even nicer experience in getting to see the other teams on a regular basis. Because I know, like, my team, we actually never met in person, all of us, like, ever all together at once. We only met some of us in person after the research had ended. So I think it'll be an even nicer experience for you. Not to say that I didn't have a positive experience, but a bit about me. So so I recently finished my undergrad at U of T. I did mainly hard sciences, so I didn't have that academic social sciences background. And I'd say to people who kind of are in the same position, whether you're in first year or you just haven't done kind of the academic social sciences stuff, don't be too scared. Like, maybe you'll have a bit of a steeper learning curve at the start, kind of getting familiar with the language that people are using or the research methods. But I think if you have the interest in kind of succeeding and the drive to do some catching up or some extra reading, you'll be fine. Like, it's really nothing too scary or too complicated. Like, it's really about the skills that you bring, the willingness to do the research and kind of to take the extra step and catch up and talk to people and know how to kind of figure out what's missing. I think you'll do fine. But if you're still worried about that, or if you have any extra questions, feel free to reach out and I can reassure you. So yeah, as Maren said, I was on team HPP, and I won't get into my case study too much because you can read about it online, and I want to talk about my experience more, but it's essentially a maternal health intervention in Guatemala that used portable ultrasound kits to lower maternal mortality in rural areas. Next slide, please. Thanks, Tony. So I'll talk to you a bit more about my research process, because for me, when I was applying to REACH, it was kind of really difficult to see, in a sense, how the case studies that were really interesting, but kind of what the research process was to lead to that case study. Like, the case studies were cool, but I was like, I have no idea what I would be doing to make this, even though there was information about the process, if that makes sense. So in June 2020 is when we got onboarded, and there were a couple workshops about leadership and teamwork, and then we launched almost immediately into the pitching process. I won't talk about that too much because I'm pretty sure it's changed since I did it. But then we selected our case studies in September, October. We met our teams and started working, and that's when the coaching started as well. So there was coaching for our team, kind of setting the dynamic and our expectations for each other, and it continued throughout, and like coaching on how to give feedback productively and that kind of stuff. And I think that was one of the most beneficial aspects of REACH in terms of coaching, is working consciously on your teamwork skills. I think it's really valuable. But there's also like personal coaching accompanying that, where you get to work on things that you want to work on. So really room for you to take kind of the initiative and explore things that you're maybe less comfortable doing. And yeah, we had our team meeting, kind of set a strategy, met our mentor, who was Joe, and we started doing the lit review. And so that was I think in the beginning, that was probably like the toughest part of REACH, where you're really getting familiar with your project, and we were online, so it was a bit tough and we didn't know each other as much. So I think that was the toughest part. But once we kind of got our footing, and you have to read a lot about your project and really become an expert on your project even before you talk to anyone or submit your REB. So it's a lot of reading, a lot of coming up with questions, and looking at everything twice just to become familiar with it and make sure you didn't miss anything. And then in January, we submitted our REB. If you're scared about that, don't be. It wasn't as intimidating as it can sound. And it's also a really valuable experience knowing how to put one together, and their support for doing that. And then we started our interviews. That was the highlight of the process for me. What attracted me to REACH was kind of like the journalistic aspect. And it lived up to the hype. It was really cool. Coming to people who kind of knew the project, and questions that you'd had all along, and like they say something really interesting, and you can kind of pick up on it and follow and explore that, and you kind of have to think on your feet. And I was nervous for it, but like having the support of your team there, and being prepared with all your lit review, I think makes for a really positive experience. Of course, there were some challenges, time zone differences, people who don't follow up, and translation. That can make it difficult, but it's a really positive experience overall. And then we kind of wrote and reviewed. We went over the deadline, but I don't think that's allowed for you. Yeah, and next slide, please, Moni. And now it's out there, and it's our final case study, and it's really rewarding. And I think that's another great thing about REACH, is that you have responsibility, but it's also ownership for all parts of the project. And you get the experience of doing it, but it's just so rewarding to see it at the end in the case study. And it's like, you did this and you did every part of it with your team, of course, but it's super rewarding, and knowing that it has an impact makes it even sweeter. But yeah, next slide, please. Thanks. So I think obviously the core of REACH is the research, and that's valuable experience, but also a valuable impact. But in terms of why pick REACH, I suppose, over other research opportunities, is that it's more than just the research. There's like a lot of, you feel like there's investment in you, I guess, as a person and as a researcher. So there was the career exploration, and that was what I talked about at the beginning with that doodle. It's more sophisticated than that doodle made it sound, but for me, that was a really valuable experience. Like, it really helped me think about things in a different way. And there's a one-on-one aspect to that as well. Again, team coaching and personal coaching, and then the skills development series were fantastic in my experience. There are practical workshops where you get to build familiarity with software, like in vivo, for example, which I'd never heard of before, but then I used it for school going forward. There are research. So if you're less familiar with social science, this might be like even more helpful. There were really interesting workshops on things like ethnography, for example, and the people giving the workshops are very, very experienced. They know what they're talking about, and it's like a privilege to be able to be with them in these very small groups where you have access to them to ask whatever you want and to really follow up, to meet them and to make connections. And they're all very nice. They're very, they're great professors, but they're not intimidating. And yeah, there are also some fun ones. And it's also a great opportunity to meet the other teams, especially in person, but also online. Yeah, next slide, please. So yeah, there are also opportunities to attend seminars and to connect with profs and alumni and people in industry, like through the Symposium, for example, which is a really cool experience. I think really summing it up is that Reach is something you don't really get to experience a lot as an undergrad or even as a grad student. I think it's just a fantastic opportunity in terms of the research, but in terms of everything else that comes into it. Everyone in Reach is super friendly and approachable. And I think one thing I like to emphasize is that the more you put into it, the more you'll get out of it. Like, you can get by just doing the minimum research, but I'd really encourage you to make the most of the experience and the supports that you have while you're going along, because it just gives you the opportunity to develop so much as a researcher, but also as a person, and to make really great connections that will hopefully last you like beyond just Reach. And if you're ever stuck, there are always people there to help you. And speaking of that, I'll put my email in the chat if you have any questions about not the application process itself. I'm probably not the best person to ask about that, but the application or the research process. If you still have some concerns or about anything or questions and you want to know more, I'm always happy to reach out. And if you get accepted and you have questions about the actual research process, also happy to help then. And yeah, thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Jonathan. That was a great overview. And so I'll invite Saida to share her experience, who's currently going through it. So she hasn't quite gotten to the case study development and finishing phase, but at least she's gone through this from June until now. So welcome, Saida.
All right, thank you so much. So hi, everyone. As Moni said, my name is Saida, and I'm also really excited to speak to everyone today, even though I'm not fully done the Reach research process. So just a little bit of background about myself before we get into the details of the Reach experience. I'm in my third year of undergrad, working on a double major in peace, conflict, justice studies, and criminology. So I'm more on the social science aspect as opposed to the hard sciences. I work as a research assistant at Victoria College's Institute for the History and Philosophy of Science and Technology, where I research aspects of the racialization of technology during the 18th and 19th century. But yeah, that's enough about me. We can move on into the actual Reach case study that my team is currently working on. We could do the next slide, please. Thank you. So we're researching Zvandiri, and Zvandiri is a peer-based nonprofit program intended to improve HIV prevention and treatment among youth in sub-Saharan Africa. So with their headquarters in Zimbabwe, Zvandiri also operates in Nigeria, Ghana, Rwanda, Zambia, Kenya, and a few other places. So this program is run by Africa, which is a larger organization, and uses evidence-based approaches to connect youth living with HIV, ages 0 to 24, through local support networks with mentored peer counselors also living with HIV. So these community adolescent treatment supporters, or CATs as we call them, use innovative and holistic methods to improve adolescent engagement in care, adherence to treatment, rates of virological reduction, and mental well-being. So our research has a particular focus on their Young Mentor Mothers, or YMM program, which provides targeted support to help young mothers living with HIV prevent transmission of the virus to their children. So Zvandiri launched the YMM program in 2018 in response to the disproportionately high burden of HIV among young women and the high rates of young pregnancies in sub-Saharan Africa. So the YMM support other young mothers with HIV throughout their pregnancy and postnatal care to help with testing, treatment and service accesses for themselves and their infants. So this need for more specialized treatment, along with the fact that young mothers with HIV are a subset of the broader population of people living with HIV, makes establishing effective support networks all the more challenging. So for these reasons, in addition to geographic isolation in Zimbabwe, young mothers with HIV are a hard to reach population that merit particular focus through REACH research. So while extensive study has been conducted on the work of Zvandiri as a whole, none of it has had a particular focus on the scalability of the YMM program, currently only operational in Zimbabwe. So our research focus is thus on the prospect of scaling up the YMM program, both within Zimbabwe and throughout sub-Saharan Africa. Next slide, please. Oh, thank you. So our primary research question is Zvandiri's Young Mentor Mother program scalable to regions outside of Zimbabwe? And in order to address this question, some of our research aims to expand our understanding of the YMM model by asking questions on how it successfully operates within Zimbabwe, the day-to-day experiences of staff and volunteers, how the program can be improved, as well as barriers and challenges it currently faces. An example question to this effect is, how do YMMs develop trust within their communities despite stigma? And other research questions we have focus on scalability, looking at what kind of role national or regional governments play in the YMM program, and how that role would differ between countries and geographic regions, as well as how the program would need to be changed, if at all, to be effective in other regions. So now I'll move into our research process. So mind you, I have this in a chronological order, but I really want to emphasize that the communication with Zvandiri, the secondary research, all of it kind of occurs simultaneously. So it's not as chronological as I made it look, but there is still an element of like an order to it. So the first part of our research process after getting our project approved was establishing contact with Zvandiri, so setting up meetings with them so that we could discuss the nature of our research and perhaps collaborate on a direction. We focused on the YMM model, got access to more of their internal data, and learned that they'd be happy to facilitate connections between our research team and staff from Zimbabwe's Ministry of Health and Childcare, which oversee a lot of Zvandiri's work. So after that, we conducted more extensive secondary research, literature reviews, and looked into scalability models, more about Zvandiri and the work they already have and that they've published, as well as the general research topic of young mothers living with HIV. So all of this was in order to prepare for our research ethics board submission, where we put together our rationale for the research, outlined potential risks, created our consent forms, interview guides, and other necessary documentation. We recently received ethics approval, and we're now kind of in that process of ironing out some details with Zimbabwe for ethics on their side, and after which we'll undertake about 20 or more digital interviews with Zvandiri staff, young mentor mothers, and staff from Zimbabwe's Ministry of Health and Childcare. And so the main focus of these interviews would be to focus on the strengths and weaknesses of the YMM program, as well as how these might impact considerations for future scalability and other next steps for the program. So once our interviews are complete, we will begin writing our final report with input and collaboration from Zvandiri staff members who've already expressed interest in this co-authorship prospect. Since none of our teammates originate from the cultural context in which Zvandiri operates, this is sort of done in order to ensure that we are accurately representing the needs, concerns of voices of those who do. So that's enough about the research process. I will move now into the impacts of REACH. So the impacts of REACH, or I guess the reach of REACH, is pretty vast. You'll have to allow the pen. I live for pens. So the most immediate impact, I think, is just as students being able to reach the hardest to reach populations, learning about these communities, their stakeholders, their leaders, their activists, as well as working directly with change makers. It's the kind of research that a lot of students myself included, want to undertake in undergrad, but there are often very few opportunities to do so. So this leads into the next big impact, which is really just the research experience. You get a complete behind the scenes look at the research process. And I mean, just beyond conducting literature reviews, you're in charge of pretty much everything about your research, from the research ethics board of approval, which, let me tell you, is not as intimidating as it sounds, but the interface is wild and there's a lot of learning that goes into that whole process. And as well as just structuring interview guides and pretty much every aspect of your research project. And in general, the process is very student driven and gives you a lot of independence, which is a really great learning experience. The community and the network, which is something Marin touched on, but you'll hear a lot throughout your experience at Reach, is it's not just the amazing professors and mentors, but your peers and fellow researchers. No two researchers are exactly alike. Everyone has their different disciplines, perspectives, and interests, and there's always a lot to learn from your team. And lastly, there are a lot of workshops and coaching sessions. Some of them focus on skills and professional developments like career histories or team building, and others focus on research specific elements. So they teach you about ethics submission or creating interview guides and writing a case study. We did one on cartography, which ended up being super relevant outside of Reach for my work that I do. And I didn't expect it to be, but it's kind of just general skills and research stuff that pops up out of nowhere. And you'll just see that, oh, there's something that you learned in Reach ended up popping up in a class or volunteering or work. So there's a lot to be learned through those as well. And these are just some of the impacts, but they're just the ones that I wanted to highlight, but there are a lot more that you kind of come across as you undergo your Reach experience. So the last part of my presentation is just some advice, which is really, as you can see, to apply. It seems a little redundant to say it 3 times or to write it 3 times, but I really want to emphasize the importance of just applying. Even if you don't get in or you choose not to accept the position, the application process from the written submission to the various interviews, of which there are many, is worth so much. You get a lot of practice answering questions. Some questions you may anticipate, others you will definitely not anticipate, but generally you'll learn a lot about yourself, your motivations, your research interests, and just really fine tune your interviewing and application skills. But that about wraps up my presentation. Thank you everyone for listening. Good luck with your applications. Also, thank you, Moni and Marin, for the chance to speak to everyone today.
Great, thank you. And that leads us very beautifully into our session while you're all here, as well as the application process. As I said, my name is Moni and I'm the research officer. I've been at Reach now into my 2nd year, so 2nd recruitment season. So we'll start with who can apply. And who can apply? We really only have one eligibility, basically that you are a registered student for both fall and winter. So we need students that have access to all the U of T resources that provides in order to, the research process is involved and you need many different resources as a student. And so you can be from undergrad to graduate to PhD, teams are all mixed up. And that's what makes Reach the magic that it is, because when else will you get a chance to work with such a diverse network of people and students? And really, it is our researchers and their diversity that is a strength. So yes, any student can apply, but not everyone is a good fit for Reach. So these are the traits in which we have outlined on our website on the Who Can Apply section. And the reason we did that is so that we can be better able to express kind of and learn from over the years, what are the traits that we're trying to develop, because we're developing not just leadership research skills, but as Jonathan and Saida mentioned, we're really developing global leaders who can tackle problems and who will be committed to the SDGs. So these kinds of traits, the combination of all these is listed on our website, and I'll just quickly review. The ability to prioritize is an important one as students, as this is a co-curricular activity. We know that there are many other exciting things on campus as well, in addition to you maintaining your academic record. So the ability to prioritize becomes important because there are many aspects of Reach, and it is a very intensive program if you take advantage of every programming that is offered. However, there is also a deliverable, and this is, while it's not necessarily a paid position or for credit, there is very real deliverables and working on a real world problem. And that case study report is a must. So how can you balance all of the competing priorities you have? And sometimes the timeline for delivering on whether it's research ethics applications or whatnot, may conflict with some of your academic work or other extracurriculars. So this is where, and I spend a lot of time prioritizing because this is one of the key aspects of success is, do you have the time and ability to prioritize this in your current schedule? The other trait is to really have an interest in global citizenship. To really care about equity issues, not just in our own local, but to have a global sense of addressing equity on a global scale and challenges around. So we're looking for someone that really wants to commit to an understanding of the world and their part in the world. And research is one aspect of having impact. We're looking for team players and collaborators, and I will make a distinction that this is not a teamwork on a group paper. So this isn't the same skills needed to work on a group paper. This is more in line with sports teams. If you have played sports, you know that there are different people and different roles on a team, but together is one unit. So it's a really different mindset. And unfortunately, I'm not going to go into the detail. I can't explain the details, but that is a key distinguisher of REACH from other group work that you may have done. This is a team-based work in which everyone has an equal responsibility for the deliverable. So communication is a given for any professional setting, but particularly when you work in extra interdisciplinary teams, because you have different languages, you have different lenses of the world, and there are so many different kind of timelines. And so communication and your comfort in growing your communication skill is a key skill that we're looking for. Creativity and strategic thinking, it can be defined in many ways. But the reason we say this is because you will experience many hurdles. And as Jonathan and Saida have alluded, that the R&B process or the research process can be long. You will encounter various roadblocks. So we're looking for people that are driven to problem solve and have creativity and think outside the box and not give up so easily when they hit a roadblock. So this is an aspect in which is an important part. We're also looking for lifelong learners. So not just learning about research, because there's many other places at U of T you can learn, but the secret to really learning on a continuous basis and to really take advantage of all the different kind of learning opportunities offered at REACH is those that have drivenness to learn new things and enjoy that process. So whether it's in your field or not, maybe it's the joy and discovering something new and being able to apply it in different settings. So that lifelong learner is a key ingredient of ideal candidate. And I'll end with action-oriented because this is a student-led initiative. So this means that there's no supervisor or faculty telling you what to do. The students have to have a will and desire and a plan in which the faculty only advise. So this is we're disrupting the academic model in which the students are taking ownership, and that means you have to be willing to take action and initiative. And so we're looking for students that are comfortable with that. So the technical parts are, we're now getting into the application process is an online form, which is on Microsoft Forms, which is part of the U of T platform. So if you have a U of T email, you can log in. If you don't have a U of T email, there's a separate application to use, and that's outlined on our system. So there are different sections of our application. So on that form, there's a section on just kind of demographics, what is your field of study, and short questions that we get a chance to get to know you more. And then there are 4 short answer questions that we ask for 200 words max. So not a long novel here. We're just looking for succinct responses that touch on these 4 areas. So 1 is your research experience. 2 is an opportunity or experience where you went outside of your comfort zone. 3 is an experience where you took initiative in which you addressed an unmet need. And the 4th question really is a very standard question of like, what is your motivation? What is drawing you to apply to REACH and be part of it? And so now let me get to the little nuance of the research. If you are a first-year student and you don't have that much research experience, how do you answer that? Well, I think in school, and there are many opportunities to research and to write papers. And so any skills and experience that you have related to researching something, maybe it is academic, or maybe it is personal, where you had to research a lot and apply the same skills that you would use in research. We are looking for people that have at least an understanding and drivenness to learn the research process. And then the fourth part of the application is required documents, and I'll review that. So we're asking for these 4 documents to be saved in a single PDF and then uploaded on that online portal. So the first document is a 2-page resume. So just highlighting what your experiences have been, the clubs, the skills, experiences. Second is your unofficial transcript. So this is your U of T transcript we're referring to. So please go to your ACON and you can just send a copy of this academic history page so that we get a sense of what your courses have been and the grades. But we also, what's special about Reach is this annotated transcript. And this is where you get a chance to pick 5 courses from your transcript that best reflect who you are as a student and explain why. And this we're looking for because sometimes we know that a grade doesn't always reflect your capacity or your interest, or sometimes a low grade could, if there are certain circumstances that you want to explain what happened. It allows for the story of your own interests, of your own personal context of why certain courses were of interest to you. So this is really a good opportunity to kind of showcase how your values and your skill sets align with the skill sets and values of Reach. So you can discuss them individually or collectively, as it says there. And the fourth and new actually form that we've introduced this year is just your co-curricular activity list that you will be. So it's a listing of your activities, your clubs. Maybe you have a job or RA-ship, just to be able to list them for your fall and winter term, how many hours you're committed to in a week, or if it's a monthly thing or a yearly thing, you can list it. It just gives us a good sense of what is already on your commitment list and to be able to assess your interest and commitments. The key thing is the deadline is April 24th and at midnight. So please make sure if you want to be considered for next year's cohort to please submit your application by April 24th. Practical notes, please have your required documentation, so that single PDF already worked on and saved and be able to submit it once you start the online application. You can't just start an application, save a profile and come back later. Unfortunately, there's limitations to this system and form. So you'll have to complete the application in one session. The key also is you will get a confirmation email of your answers to your form. This, make sure you get that. If you didn't get that, it means your application was not submitted. I did have a student last year who thought she submitted the application, but actually was never submitted. So I don't want that to happen this year to any of you after doing all that work. So please make sure that you receive that confirmation. And then rolling assessment. We are reviewing applications as they come in. So but we will accept all the way up to April 24th. So the sooner that if your application is ready, please, we encourage you to submit it as early as it's ready, so that we can have time to assess it as it comes and allow us to be able to provide timely responses by May 13th. Everyone who has submitted an application will receive a response. Okay, so then what happens after I submit? The magical question is, once you submit it and you're waiting. Well, one thing is we do have provided an optional student equity survey. This is in alignment with U of T's student equity survey. And I will stress that admission decisions are not based on any of this information that's collected in this survey. It is totally optional and anonymous. But we do highly encourage you to fill out the survey. As you know, equity, diversity, and inclusion are an important part of our charter. And so it helps us to assess how our initiatives are increasing diversity in our cohort. So once that your application is submitted, by May 13th, you'll get a response, and the successful candidates will then be invited to interviews. And Saida has noted, there's many interviews. It's true. Many interviews from May to June. So we have a total of 3 rounds. The first 2 are over Zoom, and then the last round is a group interview. And now that in-person is allowed, we most likely will do it in person because it's a group interview and much more easier to assess. So we are putting out there, the dates are listed on our website around, but between May and June, we ask candidates to be ready for the interviews. And the assessment panel includes a variety of people, so not just staff, but as well as our alumni get involved. So you might see Jonathan later on. We will also have our faculty mentors who join part of the interviews. So it is a very involved, everyone in the community is involved in the assessment. And then the final selection will be announced at the end of June. And then we do have dates of what the critical pathway is, of what happens once selected. And this includes our summer orientation sessions, our training camp, and then the full research process once the academic term starts. So we have tried to outline that in some of the key dates on our website in the REACH research process. So please make sure to review that in detail so you can anticipate some of the key dates. So we're gonna open it up now to question. I know that Maren has been helpful in answering questions in the chat, and I hope that that's been helpful to you. But I do want to cover some frequently asked questions. So, and one of them is, given COVID, I know all of us, we get this question, is how will it affect my participation? And partly you know the answer because we have 2 researchers here from the past 2 years who have participated and successfully finished and were able to conduct research despite not being able to go into the field and do things remotely. So we are moving ahead, and actually it's more critical given all that we're learning through COVID and the inequities that it's revealing that how important our research is and how important it is. So we can still have a high impact research even though it's done remotely. And we follow U of T guidelines and our local public health guidelines. So right now we are following all the guidance of safety abroad, and until they allow international travel, we are keeping with this the messaging of until further notice and until we know further. All our research right now will be in line with U of T COVID-19 response. The next question is, will I be paid for my work or receive academic credit? This, as I alluded, this is a co-curricular activity, so it's not a paid research position. There are other paid research positions at U of T that allow for that kind of experience. We are not one of them, partly because we are we're seeking motivation, and this isn't a given research project. The students come up with the research themselves and then are their own PI. So this is a very different experience. So it's not like a given research and you just participate in a given process. Can you receive academic credit? The answer to this is mixed. It is co-curricular, so we're not giving any academic credit per se, but we are open to exploring for students who want to explore this through their own academic unit. So sometimes there are independent research courses, and for students that are willing to do the work with their faculty to explore this, we're happy to have that conversation and do it together. But it is on a case-by-case basis right now because we're interdisciplinary and we're recruiting students at all various levels. It's very hard to just provide this one credit that can be applied to all students. How much time do I have to commit? I think this question was answered. Does anyone want to jump in on that? Jonathan, I think you answered this.
Sorry, which question? I was just answering something.
Like how, how
sorry.
much time do I have to commit? Maybe both of you can share what your experience has been.
Yeah, for sure. So, well, it definitely depends, like based on what stage of the research you're at. So, you know, maybe in the beginning, you're doing more coaching and skills development workshops. So those don't necessarily involve a lot of prep work, but then, you know, the literature review starts. And so you're really getting deep into it, and then you're preparing the REB. And then there's like a bit of a waiting period where there's less involved, like around January, but you have to work on identifying who you're going to interview and start researching them. And then the interviews happen, and that's probably the busiest part where, you might have interviews getting scheduled kind of last minute. You might have to pivot between interviews based on what you've been told. You might have to do some additional research. And it can be intensive, and it can be heavy, depends on the week. In general, it really depends on your team. Like for us, we had 1 hour meetings with our half an hour meeting with our faculty mentor every 2 weeks at the start, and then every week, and then we'd catch up for half an hour after without him. And then we'd also have a separate 1 hour meeting every week. And then there were the workshops on top of that. It's not as bad as it sounds, I promise. And it can be fun too. But yeah, I think as long as you're able to manage your time, you'll be fine. Yeah, and Saida, I don't know if you have something that, yeah.
Yeah, so I'll just jump onto that. It sounds when you're I guess even just hearing this presentation, it sounds like it's more work than you can handle, but it's definitely not. One thing you have to remember is that you're working with a team. So it's not just you doing everything for the research project. So the team that I'm working with, all of us have very different schedules. So we've picked out like 1 hour a week to meet, and then we meet with our mentor like bi-weekly or like based on the need for it. And the thing that we've realized is that everyone, because we have busy schedules, we all have different times where we're more available to work and less available to work. So the important thing is just to remember to like communicate that, because I think one of the students in my team ended up having like this giant thing for her master's. So she was like out of commission for a week, but everyone else was like more than happy to pick up the slack. And another thing that you have to like recognize is the importance of time management, which sounds very cheesy. I recognize that everybody says that. But I ended up doing a lot of other volunteering things throughout like one of the busier portions where we were doing pitching as well as just figuring out the team and then doing coaching. And the thing that I realized is because Moni and the rest of Reach is incredibly organized, you kind of know when exactly things are happening. Like, you know, the dates for workshops in April, like from September or October. So the idea is just, if you're worried about time or if you're worried about time commitments, is using your time to the best of your ability and planning ahead and seeing like, oh, this time all of our researchers have a lot of time available. Let's get as much work as we can done, and using the free time that you have as efficiently as possible. And then that kind of filters out the stress of not thinking you'll have time or feeling overburdened. But yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, we have heard from researchers, I mean, it's varied, but really that it can feel like almost like the equivalent of a course, you know, from the time that you spend in person meeting to the homework and the individual tasks that people have to prepare in order to meet. So, and then on top of that is the coaching sessions, the skills development workshops. And so in addition to the research, there's many different types of meetings and time commitments required. So this is why we say it's important that you have time in your schedule to be able to take advantage and participate fully. So, and the question here is, yeah, this is a common question I get from undergraduate students, or maybe recent master students. I don't have formal research experience. Am I still eligible? How about Saida? You had some research experience, right? So you were able to transfer, and Jonathan had some basic science research experience, but not social science experience. So actually the research you may have, even for people that have research experience, it may not directly relate to the type of research that you'll be doing at Reach. But like we said, the only eligibility criteria is that you're registered student for both fall and term. So I know some of the questions in here were like, I'm only going to be a student for one term. So unfortunately, that means that your eligibility is not met, because we are asking, it could be full-time or part-time, but that you are a registered student for fall and winter term. So you don't necessarily have to have official research experience, and that's why we offer this. That's why this program exists, is to give students the opportunity to build research experience. So we're not looking for people that actually have all of those traits that I mentioned previously, all nice and shiny and developed. Actually, then this program won't benefit you. We're really looking for people that have the potential to grow in these areas. And so if you're able to communicate the skills related to some of that is required in research and why you want to develop this research experience in your application, that is what would help and how you can go about answering that question.
Can I add something quickly
Sure.
to that? So I know that because of the way that interviews and applications are structured, there's this need to think that you have to be extremely accomplished to have a chance. I kind of want to dispel that right away, because having research experience doesn't necessarily mean you're at all a perfect candidate or at all that you have any of the other traits. One thing that you should all be considering when you're doing your applications, if you choose to apply, is to filter and to make sure that the things that you're pointing out, the elements of your application that you want to highlight, are the skills. Because having a fancy internship doesn't actually mean that you have the skills required to excel in that internship. It just means you have the internship. So the thing that you want to consider when you're putting your application together is to highlight your important skills and things that you've learned, whether it's a big volunteering thing or a small thing, or if it's not even research related, is just to look at sort of the skills that Moni outlined and that are, I think, on the Reach website as well, and just to see what experiences and like volunteering or extracurricular things you have going on that really apply, or that you feel like those skills really shine through, and then to highlight those in your application, as opposed to thinking that you need some extensive research experience, because you really don't. Like, it's all about what you learn and the skills that you come to Reach and to the application process with.
Yeah, thank you, Say. That's really helpful. And as you know, like, research skills isn't part of our ideal candidate. As you see, there's so many other skill sets that we're looking to develop. And what my other suggestion would be, prepare this as you would any other application and job interview. There is a paper copy of presenting yourself and aligning, understanding an organization and understanding your skill sets and see how they align. That's part of what you would do with any application form. And then the interview process as well will be reflective of, like, we would be further digging into personally the skill sets as well, and ability for interviewing. So if you're not comfortable or have never done your resume before, have never interviewed, there are many resources at U of T in which you can take advantage to that can help you with your resume, that can help you prepare for interviews as well. So take advantage of the resources. That is what one researcher who's an engineer shared too, is know what your story is and take advantage of the resources at the university to help support and build your confidence and give you the skills needed. Maren, do you have any, I know you're busy answering questions, but do you have any input?
No further input on that question, Moni. I'm just responding to questions in the chat.
Okay. So we're at 1, so we have 1 hour here, and I don't know if there are any. Does anyone have any live questions to ask any of our panelists today while we have the time? I know there's many written ones, and Maren is getting to them. There is one question here in terms of any tips for people who may have applied in the past and were filtered out. So maybe that's like the interview process, or that's the application. So Saida, Jonathan, how did you prepare? Maybe that's a better question, is how did you prepare for your application and for your interviews?
I can start, as it might have been more recent. So for the interviews, I think the first 2 interviews I prepared like I would for pretty much any other interview. I just went over my resume and like the Reach application, because I had a feeling that they would ask questions about the application. And I think some of the questions I got in the first interview were very typical to what I would expect. So talk about your time commitment and talk about your different experiences that you think are really relevant to Reach and things like that. And then the second one, the second interview, that one caught me off guard, because I think it's a really great thing, because it asks a lot about your motivations and your interests as a person, as opposed to just like, tell me about your resume. So I think one thing to consider going into your interviews is to recognize, like, Reach isn't looking at you as just a resume or like a piece of paper. They're looking at you as a person. So they're trying to understand, like, can you work in a team? Do you have those skills to work in a team? Can you communicate? Things like that. And then the last interview was the group interview. Ours was online, and I think we received, I don't know if this will change or not, so please keep that in mind. But we received like a document to sort of overview and then talk about at the actual interview. And one thing that I would say is not to feel like you should be scripted during interviews, because I think that makes it really hard for you to come across as a person. It sounds like you're memorizing answers and saying them. I think be comfortable with, yourself, but also like the content that you'd be talking about, whether it's your resume or an article that you're referring to, and try to, I know this really is probably really hard to do, but just try to think of it as a conversation. That always helps me for interviews, is to recognize that it actually really is a conversation. It's just a back and forth, and there feels like there's pressure, and just to kind of to reframe it in your mind as just a casual conversation, or at least like an important conversation if you can't go for casual. I think that really helps make you feel more at ease and answer the questions in a more personable way. But yeah, those are my that's my input.
Yeah, that's really good advice. Yeah, so I did mine 2 years ago now, so I don't totally remember that much, and I don't know how much is still relevant. But I had to do the same, like annotated transcript, I remember. And I think my strategy for the annotated transcript, if we can call it a strategy, was to, like, each one was, obviously you have to think about them separately, but you also have to think about the picture that comes out of all 5 combined. So you really want to, it's about showing the 5 courses that really represent you best as a student overall. So there are different aspects and what that means to you. So for example, for one of mine, it was a class that was totally out of my field, but I really enjoyed and what I did to overcome kind of the gap in the education to really to succeed in that class. One of them was just a class that was really tough and a really like time consuming thing. One of them was a class that just terrified me to death. One of them was just a class that I took for fun and I really enjoyed, and like showcasing my different academic interests as well. And kind of combined what I wanted to come out from that was that I have like different interests and I work to achieve them. So think about that, like what it's kind of almost like an essay where each course is making a distinct point, but combined it makes for a compelling argument, I suppose. For the questions, I think I answered the same ones that are this year, but those are just personal experiences, and I think you have to balance it between kind of realizing that the other people haven't lived through this, so they have no context for what you're talking about. So you have to balance telling the story of what you want to get across in that experience with making it relevant and making sure you're still talking about what that says about you. So you have to give enough background for it to be like coherent, but you also have to make sure you're not just telling the experience, like talk about what you felt and what you did and what impact that had. For the actual interviews, I'd say I was surprised when I think we had the same like process with the 3 stages, but we didn't know that going in. I think each step, another one was added, which is funny. But I was surprised at the first interview and the second one, like how well the interviewers knew my application. Like they knew me, and I think they might have done extra research, I'm not sure. But what I'm trying to say with that is when you're writing your application, be deliberate about what you're writing, but be honest. Don't try to inflate things. Just be kind of truthful and honest and passionate. And I think the passion is really important. You should be able to kind of, it should come like clear that you're passionate about what you're talking about and that you mean it, because I think it's easy to write about it and kind of inflate it, but when you're talking about it, if you're not being like honest, I think it's easy to see, and it'll make it harder for you. It'll make you nervous. I think if you're confident and you can defend everything you've said, I think you'll do fine. It really is like a conversation about your interests and kind of seeing how you work and what interests you. And yeah, and for the third one, I don't know how much I'm allowed to talk about that, but again, be confident and stand by what you believe in, and you'll do fine. Yeah.
Wow, I couldn't have said it better. And I think they really are, that's the right framework. Maybe we should call them conversations. Applications are really, any application is a conversation. It's an opportunity to tell who you are and what you're passionate about and why you care about what you're applying to. So I think that is very true. It is a storytelling mechanism. Everyone has a unique history, a unique skill set and experiences, and that's where you can highlight who you are. So be proud of what you've learned and what you want to keep learning. And I think those are really key things about the application process. Is it can be intimidating, and I know that it is a very involved process, but it really is to assess the for the most successful applicants, so that because, as you know, we have learned just over the years that because it's a co-curricular activity, this is a very challenging and intensive process. But for those that can see that and enjoy that discomfort and enjoy learning and enjoy being able to learn, is going to be the people that can really succeed. And so that's why we put a lot of process into it, because we really want to select those that are going to be set up to succeed in this experience. So, and our whole community gets involved. And so don't be intimidated by that as well, but at least to know that it's not, each application is assessed at least by 2 people. And then each interview has 2 people. So there are multiple sets of eyes looking at it, at your application. And so that helps also with mitigate some of the potential biases. So if you can be able to tell your story to multiple people and be able to share clearly your skill sets and your passions and alignment with REACH, then that's really how you can think of the application process. Okay, we're at time, and I think Maren has answered most of the questions. We have this last question that has come in. And they're asking for more information about conducting interviews. I mean, with the purpose for this REACH interview is not any different than any other interview that you have in a job or an internship or a fellowship. This interview is really to get to know more about you. And so I think that's what we're trying to, on a paper application, you can only say so much, but I think in person, we're also looking at the ability for someone to speak about their experiences. So
I think this question, Moni, is about the interviews in the field. So maybe I
will.
Oh,
sorry. I totally in this application mode.
Maybe, but we will answer it both ways, and that way we know for sure it's addressed. So in terms of the process for conducting interviews, yes. And sorry, Jonathan, I saw you were typing that. Actually, Jonathan, why don't you answer this, because you've just gone through the process?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, quickly, I think I also understood about the field interviews. So sometimes you do want to talk to people who are directly involved with the project. That will maybe be the bulk, depends on exactly your particular circumstances. So people who are familiar with the project, who helped create it, or just people in the organizations who might not be directly related, but know about the organization's priorities, for example. Sometimes you want to talk to just general experts in the region, so people who know kind of the political background of the area, or some of the specific, like for us, for example, health challenges in the area. We spoke, actually I'm not allowed to say who we spoke to, so never mind. We spoke to people from not just in our project, I'll say it like that. Yeah, there's confidentiality. Yeah, that's part of the RAB. But yeah, you'll speak to experts who don't even know that the project exists, but their expertise is valuable for getting you the background you might need to talk to people who were involved in the project. Like there is kind of like a hierarchy in a sense of how much you need to know before you approach each person, and the people who are kind of the closest to the project and who know the most and whose interviews might be the most informative, you have to be kind of the most informed of ahead. So it's really valuable to talk to people who are a bit farther away but have kind of the gaps in the general knowledge that will help you kind of more effectively talk to the other people. And the specific goal you go into the interviews really depends on what you're missing in your case study. So it's hard to say, like, without even a case study, obviously you can't know the goal, but it's kind of like a team effort. As you're doing the research, you're identifying people, maybe people who have wrote articles on your project, or people involved in the organizations, and you're identifying them and keeping track of who might be useful to talk to, and specifically what they might know about the project that'll help you with a case study, you kind of need to fill in the gaps from the background to the impact to the actual operations. Sometimes it's to corroborate what you've read if you're not sure about it, but it's also sometimes like gaps in terms of what you don't know about. Like for us, there was a really big gap in terms of like who made the kits and like where did they come from. So that was something we needed to talk to people to find out. But yeah, sorry, Maren. And if you want to take the rest, yeah.
As you know,
That
Jonathan
was great.
yeah, he's very experienced now on how to do interviews and the types. Basically, it all relates to your research questions. So who can answer your research questions? Who are those people? And what gaps of are there in your information and knowledge, and who can fill that? That's what, and that involves people in the field. Sometimes it involves policymakers. It all depends on where those gaps are and what your research questions are. So, and with that, I think we will close the session. We are at time, and I know we've covered a lot of questions in the chat and as well in live, but if there are any further questions, please feel free to submit an email to us, reach out to us, and follow us on Twitter and Instagram. We're very active digitally. And as I said, Jonathan and Saida are welcoming your emails as well if you want their input on any other further questions. So I will follow up. I think they've shared their emails in the chat, but I'll follow up in an email providing that information. So thank you very much for joining us today. And we want to especially thank our panelists, Jonathan and Saida and Maren for taking the time to join us, and for all of our participants today. We had over, I think, like 70 or 80 people join us today. So wonderful to see so many of you interested. So we look forward to receiving your application in the coming weeks. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.